There are two kinds of eyes according to Jesus, good ones and evil ones. I'm David Servant, and this is HeavenWord TV. Well, it's so nice to be back together again as we continue our chronological study through the New Testament. And I hope you have your Bible close by, because we're going to start today where we left off last time in Matthew chapter 6, right in the heart of the Sermon on the Mount. And we're just taking our good old time. And it has been wonderful just to examine everything closely, really examine exactly what Jesus Christ is trying to tell us in this most important sermon that's 3 chapters long. So let's start today in Matthew chapter 6 and verse number 19. I want to read actually, looks like 6 verses here to get the full gist of what he's saying in this section. Okay, are you ready? Here we go. Matthew 6:19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So then, if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Okay, you got it? Now, there's some real questions that could be raised by some of the analogies that Jesus gave in that section. And we're going to cover those. And I think by the time we're done, you're going to have a great understanding here of what might be a little bit blind to us. Okay, but very clearly, Jesus is talking about money and possessions. And he starts off by telling his disciples who gathered, don't store up for yourselves treasures on the earth. I want to make one point very clear right from the start. Jesus did not say, as he is often kind of quoted as saying, do not treasure what you store up on this earth. Oftentimes, it's conveyed that all that Jesus was warning against here is an attitude, a wrong attitude towards our possessions. And we shouldn't be treasuring them in our hearts. But that's not what Jesus was saying. He's talking about literally the things that we do own. He's saying certain ones of those, don't lay them up on the earth, because there moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal. So you can understand that if all he's warning against is an attitude, changing your attitude doesn't affect what's going to happen, the likelihood of things being rusting away or moths eating them or thieves breaking in and stealing them. Jesus says that the alternative to laying them up on the earth is laying them up in heaven, and that's a place where these things don't happen. Thieves don't break in and steal. Moth and rust do not consume in heaven. So you understand, by changing our attitude, saying, well, I don't treasure these things, you haven't done anything to prevent them from being stolen by thieves. Whereas if you lay it up in heaven, then you have done something where moth and rust will not consume them. Got it? Okay, got it. So Jesus is talking about actively doing something regarding the possessions that we own or thinking about owning or might have owned, okay? All right, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth, but store up for yourselves treasure in heaven. Now, you could ask, how do you do that? How do you lay up treasure in heaven? It's not explicitly stated here, but Jesus, in other places in the 4 Gospels, makes it very clear. We store up treasures in heaven by giving them away and using the proceeds or using those things to help the poor or to build his kingdom or to spread the gospel. In Luke, it's recorded that Jesus said, make for yourselves purses that do not wear out by giving to charity, laying up your treasure in heaven, and then said the same thing. All right, so that's point number 1. Jesus is talking about an active transfer of our possessions and our wealth from earth to heaven. And, he's not really talking so much about self-dispossession, that is, getting rid of everything. He's really talking about transferring the location of where we keep our stuff. Okay? So people often look at this and say, ooh, that's kind of negative. Giving away your stuff, you have less. True, less temporarily, but more eternally and ultimately. And can you see that Jesus is just giving us a bit of wisdom that he uniquely had from his eternal perspective, that it makes so much sense, to not lay up treasures on this earth, because we're watching them disappear before our eyes. They're depreciating in value. They are rusting away. Maybe moths are getting them. There's other reasons. Things just money. If you just hang on to money on this earth, it becomes worth less and less and less and less every single year, just by virtue of inflation. Okay, so we're holding these things, but it's slipping through our fingers. And beyond that, when you die, you can't take it with you, as you hear them say. You never saw a hearse pulling a U-Haul trailer. All right, so Jesus is saying this is just wisdom for eternity. Take what you have that you're going to lose it anyways and give it up anyways, and give it up now and transfer it to where you'll never lose it. All right? You might have heard the famous quotation by martyred missionary Jim Elliot, who said, now listen closely, "He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he can never lose." Did you get that? Listen again. It's just right in line with what Christ is saying here. He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep in order to gain what he could never, ever lose. All right? So here's the first thing we want to remember, and that is Jesus is giving wise investment advice. Don't just prepare for your retirement. Prepare for your eternal retirement. I'll be right back.
By devoting just 6 minutes each weekday for 1 year, you can read through the entire New Testament using David's servant's daily devotional, HeavenWord Daily. Order your copy at HeavenWord.tv.
Okay, let's continue here now in Matthew chapter 6. We left off in verse number 20. Jesus told us, don't lay up your treasures on this earth, lay them up in heaven, where moth and rust will not consume, thieves don't break in and steal. And then in verse number 21, he said, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And this also undermines the idea that all that God is concerned with is our attitude towards our possessions. It's commonly thought that greed is just an attitude of the heart and has nothing to do with what one literally possesses. But Jesus debunks that idea, doesn't he? Because he said, where your treasure is, either in heaven or on the earth, that is where your heart is. Okay? So greed certainly is an attitude, but it's an attitude that is exemplified by actions. Think about it. What mother ever said to one of her children, now, little Johnny, it's okay if you eat all 3 of those cookies and your brother across the table doesn't get any cookie. Just don't allow greed into your heart. See, because she knows there's a direct correlation between what's in his heart, the greed in his heart, and what he does with those 3 remaining cookies, whether he eats them all himself and is greedy, or if he's willing to share 1 or 2 of them with his brother across the table. And so let us not fool ourselves. Our actions reveal what's in our hearts. And we know that God knows what's in our hearts. I remember one time reading something on a Christian blog or a chat room or something, and they were discussing, some of these things about stewardship. And one person said, I'm so glad that God looks at our hearts and not our bank accounts. And what a self-deception that is for everyone who believes it. Well, people think that God looks at our hearts by somehow peering into us with X-ray vision and seeing what's in our hearts. Of course, not in our literal physical heart, but in our heart of hearts, our spiritual hearts. But God doesn't have to do that. I don't know if he does that or not, but the way God finds out what is in people's hearts is by looking at their actions, because their actions reveal what's in their heart. All right? If you believe something, you'll act accordingly. And if you believe what Jesus said here, we're going to obey him and act accordingly. So take a look at all that you possess. Can I ask you the very penetrating question? What percentage of it is in heaven and what percentage of it is on earth? A lot of folks are, big into the mandate of tithing. It's a great scriptural principle, a great place to start. Sure, it's Old Covenant, it's pre-Old Covenant, not mentioned much in the New Covenant. Here's the New Testament rule here, but maybe you are a faithful tither. Well, then 10%, you could say, of your treasure is laid up in heaven, 90% still on the earth. What are you waiting for? Maybe you should try to increase the percentage up in heaven where thieves won't ever steal it and it'll never it never slip through your hands, okay? And when you die, it'll be waiting for you there. All right, now we come to this next section, verses 22 and 23, about the eye being the lamp of the body. She said, if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. What is all that about? I've heard lots of different interpretations. I'm going to hold off on explaining that, but we will come back, and I want to go to the next couple of verses just to show you that whatever Jesus was talking about in those verses about the eye and the being good and bad and the body being full of darkness and being full of light has something to do with money. Okay, because the subject doesn't change. It just keeps right on flowing. When we come to verse number 24, Jesus says, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth, or some translations say mammon. So you can see that the subject doesn't change from verses 19 all the way down through verse number 24. It's all about wealth, possessions, money. You got it? Okay? And I think you can also easily see that in all these verses, Jesus continually presents this contrast. In verses 19 and 20, he presents a contrast of a person who lays up their treasure on the earth and a person who lays up their treasure in heaven. Those are two diametrically opposite things, aren't they? He also contrasts the person whose heart is on the earth with the person whose heart is in heaven. That's where that's where their treasures are. Okay, so keep that in mind. Here's the guy, heart in heaven, treasure in heaven. Here's the guy, heart on earth, treasure on earth. And then if we jump over the eye enigmas and the body enigmas and go down to verse number 24, here's another contrast. You can either serve God or you can serve mammon. You can't serve them both. It's either one or the other. There's no in between. And so there's that contrast. And if we correlate that contrast with the first contrast, and try to parallel it, how are we going to do that? Well, we got over here the man whose treasure's in heaven, heart's in heaven. We got over here the man whose treasure's on earth, heart's on earth. If we're going to make that fit to the parallel of you're serving God or mammon, where are we going to put him? Well, obviously, the one serving God is the one who's laying up his treasure in heaven where his heart is. The one who's serving mammon is the one who's laying up his treasure on the earth. That's where his heart is. Keep that in mind. Now, one last analogy back to the verses that we're wondering about, verse number 22 and 23, about the eye being bad, the body full of darkness, the eye being good or clear, and the whole body being full of light. Even before we discuss what that actually means, can you see that once again there's a contrast and they're diametrically opposed contrast. And if we parallel it, make it correspond to the other contrast, how's it going to fit in? It's obvious. The man whose heart is in heaven, whose treasure is in heaven, whose God is obviously going to have to be, whatever it means, the man with the good eye, the clear eye that's full of light. And the man with the bad eye who's full of darkness is going to correspond with the person whose heart is on the earth, whose treasure is on the earth, and whose God is mammon. Okay? Don't go away. There's more to say. Be right back. church planter can walk 20 miles in a day. Give him a bicycle and he can go 3 times as far and be 3 times as effective. All right, this is such an excellent part of Matthew chapter 6, and we're looking at the section where Jesus talks about not laying up our treasures on the earth but in heaven. And we've looked at the contrast that's presented over and over again and paralleled them all together to help us to begin to understand what is this Jesus is talking about, the man with the evil eye or the bad eye full of darkness, and the man with the clear eye, his body's full of light. Well, you've got to understand the parallel contrast throughout this entire section to begin to make some sense of that, okay? So we presented them like this. On this side over here is the man whose treasure is laid up in heaven, because that's where his heart is, and because not money is his God, God is his God, okay? So that shows you the contrast and the parallel in the first and last verses of the section, contrasted with the man over here whose heart is on the earth. That's where his treasure is laid up, because God is not his God. Mammon, money is his God. And you can see there's no in between. You can't serve them both, Jesus said. It's one or the other. And then we looked at this contrast of which is presented with the guy with the good eye and the bad eye and so forth. Even before we know what they mean, it's very obvious. The man with the clear eye who is full of light has got to correspond with this man over here who's got his treasure, his heart in heaven, and God is his God. And the man with the evil eye, the man with the bad eye who's full of darkness, whatever that means, must correspond with this man over here whose heart is on earth, because that's where his treasure is, and because God is not his God, money is his God. You got it? You got it. Okay. Now, I submit to you that although those verses about the good eye and the bad eye are a little bit blind to us, everybody in Jesus' audience understood immediately what he was talking about, because he was using a common idiom of his day that everybody would have understood. And that is the idiom of the evil or the bad eye. Okay? Now, obviously, Jesus is not talking about a literal eyeball that's evil or bad and a literal eyeball that's clear. We heard some silly teachings on this over the years, that you can look into somebody's eyes and read them spiritually because the eye is the lamp of the body, and all kinds of nonsense like this. Just toss that out for a second and listen to what the Bible says, okay? The Bible uses this expression in other places. Jesus used this expression one other time about the bad eye or the evil eye. Do you remember the story of the parable Christ told of the laborers? There were some guys who the master, the owner of the vineyard, found who were looking for a job. He hired them early in the day, and he promised to pay them a fair wage for the day. And he went out subsequently throughout the day and kept finding other laborers, and he hired them at different times of the day. And at the end, he brought them all to pay them. And he paid the last workers first, and he gave them a full day's wages. And the guys who were hired earlier in the day thought, oh man, he's going to give us big bonuses because we've worked so much harder than those guys have worked. Surely we're going to get more. But they got the same amount, what they had agreed upon, a fair wage for a day. And they began to grumble about it. And the master says to those grumbling servants, this is Matthew 20 and verse number 15, "Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with what is my own? Or is your eye," now listen to this, "is your eye evil?" And I'm actually quoting from the King James Version here. The New American Standard Version says, "Is your eye envious because I am generous?" The word translated envious in the New American Standard or evil in the King James is the exact same word translated evil or bad in Matthew 6:23. The evil or the bad eye is an envious eye, a greedy eye. You can understand how that could become an expression, right? That guy has an evil eye. He's always looking for the deal, always looking how he can make a quick buck and so forth and rip other people off. That person has an evil eye. So the evil eye expression represents a heart of greed, because an eye can't be envious, an eye can't be evil, but a heart certainly can, okay? And Christ says In verse number 22, if your eye is clear, your whole body's full of light. But he says in verse 23, if your eye is bad, though your whole body will be full of darkness. So now we can put it all together, because the clear eye is opposite of the bad eye or the evil eye. And the body full of light is the opposite of the body full of darkness. Okay, so the bad eye, the person with the greedy heart, Jesus says his body is full of darkness. And just like he wasn't speaking of a physical eye, being clear or being bad or good, he's not talking about a physical body here. He's talking about the spiritual body, the being, the real person, because we all are spiritual beings. And that person who's full of greed, who is a person who's full of darkness. That is, they're void of the light of the truth. But that person whose eye is not greedy, that is, whose heart is not greedy, is full of the light, full of truth. You got it? Okay, so it's really quite easy to understand. But I want you to think about the ramifications of this as we close this down today. If we do that parallel correspondence once again, over here we have the two men. Over here we have the man whose heart is on the earth, whose treasure is on the earth. God is not his God. Money is, and he's full of darkness because he has a greedy heart. That, my friends, is not the picture of a believer in or a follower of Jesus Christ. Not a Christian. That's a person full of darkness, void of the truth. God is not his God. That person's going to hell. And how can you tell? Because that person is laying up all their treasure on this earth. They're not laying their treasure up in heaven. But this man up here represents the true believer, the true disciple of Christ. He's full of light. That is, he's full of the truth, because he doesn't have an evil eye. He's got a clear eye. He doesn't have a greedy heart. God is his God, not money is his God. His heart's in heaven. That's why he's laying up treasure there. And so I submit to you for your consideration, based upon the obvious meaning of Christ's words, people who are laying up their treasure on earth are not heaven-bound people. They are people who are not truly born again. And you can tell who's truly born again because they are obeying Christ in this regard. Okay? More about it next time. I'll see you then. God bless you.